to it. Our big finish, sort of.
I mean, it is. It's the end of an era.
It's the season finale, not series finale. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the season finale where like a main character dies, and we're like,
yeah. See you next month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Speaking of which, I think we sort of loosely talked about who was going to host what, but I just wanted to ask, are you cool with hosting a sitting in St. James, like leading the discussion?
Sure.
Okay, cool. So we can pre-announce that as well.
Yes, good point. Yeah, and I'll be more prepared for that conversation than I will be for this one. My notes are very like sparse and all over the place because I feel like this is going to be such a layered conversation in terms of this book on its own and contextually within the quartet. So I just think things are they're gonna pop up and they won't need much prompting from me. But I have some touchstones in case we need. But yes, welcome as people are joining us either live or later. We're talking about Sun by Lois Lowry, which is the final book in the Giver Quartet. I'm already feeling emotional about it. And I'm also, Kara knows, I'm sensitive today for other reasons too. So I'm just like, I'm down for a good cry.
Yep. To cleanse.
Yeah, a good cathartic cry. Some things that are relevant in terms of content warnings to this book that are very much a part of the plot, so most of them will come up in conversation, are family separation, animal death, as well as ableism. Whoops, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. References to child abuse and also grief and traumatic childbirth. So just so those are on your radar if needed, take care of yourself. You don't have to join us for this one. And if you don't want to hear about those things, I hope you're not reading about those things, in which case you probably didn't read this book, in which case you shouldn't be at this live show anyways, because this is spoiler territory. So really it comes full circle. But just in case you happen to stumble upon this for some reason, now's your chance to lovingly leave. Wow. Okay. I guess let's start basics. Let's talk about ratings, just kind of overall overarching feelings about this book and also as the finale to this series. Where's your head at?
So, I really liked it. It's funny because I actually gave it a slightly lower rating than Gathering Blue, for example. But I feel like in terms of the like quality and effectiveness of the storytelling, I feel like it maybe is actually a little better than Gathering Blue. I don't know. Like, I loved Gathering Blue, but I feel like Sun, I think it impressed me even more with how Lois Lowry pulled together everything for the series and for this book, and like the three distinct parts where it's like, how, like, why did you write it this way? And then you get to the end and it's like, oh my god, that was perfect. Like, yeah, so I really liked it. I give it a 4 stars. It still wasn't perfect, and once again we have like a pretty abrupt ending.
Oh my god, it was like the last 20 pages where I was like, Lois, we have so much to cover here.
I know. Like, the last like chapter is only like a couple pages, and I'm like, we have a lot to do. This is not. So that was one thing. And then I guess also I would say that even though I think the 3-part structure worked great, and I think that each of those was very effective, I feel like maybe there could have been, I don't know, maybe this is what people call pacing. I feel like maybe there could have been like a little tightening of some of the like plot stuff. But like the characterization was so good, the emotions, I was so invested. I think thematically this book stands on its own, but it also really like brings everything full circle. Yeah, I I really liked it. I love Claire. I told you that like I started this not remembering at what point in the timeline that the book starts, and then when I realize things, I'm like, oh my god.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was a good time.
And I'm so relieved also because I asked you when we finished talking about Messenger. I don't know if you remember this now, but I asked you, I was like, so we know that book 4 is called Sun. Like, what sun do you think they're talking about? And then after asking that question, I was like, maybe that's like too obvious of a question because it could only be like Gabriel's birth mother or Jonas's birth mother, because obviously Kira's a girl. Maddie, we meet his mom. So I was like, I shouldn't have even like broached that question. But then when you messaged me, I was like, oh, she didn't even remember saying that. It's all good.
No. And actually, I wasn't even, I think when you asked me that question, I don't think I was even like, oh, well, I can narrow it down to, because I wasn't necessarily connecting that to like the timeline of the book, you know?
Oh,
so
true,
like
true.
for all I knew, it could have been one of the female characters, you know, if they had a child later. So
yeah.
no, I don't think you gave away anything.
That's a good point. Yeah, because The Giver and Gathering Blue are pretty close in timeline in terms of when they take place. And then Messenger's after. So this could have been also after, and I guess kind of is to an extent. But yes, I super agree with you. I also gave this book 4 stars. I definitely am in agreement about tightening up some of the plot. I think everything that was there was good. It's not like it was things where I was like, why are we talking about this? Like, it was all relevant. There were just parts where it was very repetitive. And I don't know if that was like her intention to show like time passing for longer stretches, was to be like, and she would do this, and then a couple months later, and then she would do this. But I was like, okay, Lois, I truly get that she's still doing this, and she's doing it for a long time. Like, both in part 1 and part 2, I kind of felt that way.
Yes.
But I'm happy that it gives us some answers that we had questions about in other books. I do think it does a pretty effective job of tying everything together. But, and I don't fully know, or like even know how I want to say this, I think there's something about, I still can't fully encapsulate the feeling. Okay, so like The Giver, as you know, is like my favorite book, point blank, period. And I just think that there's something in like the messaging that, even though this book still feels like hope is important and it's about, you know, like to some extent sacrifice and fighting for things you love and things that we talked about in the other books, I still feel like it doesn't fully resonate message wise with the first original book to me in some ways. And I think that kind of holds back my love a little bit. I'm like, nothing gives me that same feeling that The Giver gives me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do like Claire.
I can see that.
So that kind of makes up for it.
But what'd you say?
But I do like Claire. So
yeah. I really love that the sort of like the little detail things that we've talked about Lois Lowry doing in the other books, like in terms of her writing and characterization and everything. I feel like they were also in this book. Like one of the ones that I'm thinking of is, and this is like, now it's my turn. I'm like, I don't really know how to describe this, but I tried to in a previous live show, where it's like, I love the feeling that Lois Lowry gives you, where it's like every person in this book is important, and because of a series of like events and choices, this is the character who has this opportunity right now. But it doesn't feel like a chosen one thing. Like it feels like truly anybody could have this like I don't know, inner strength, you know, like, and this like compassion, and like even the fact that in this book we find out that when people don't need their gifts anymore, they sort of just naturally fade away, which normally I don't like when characters like lose their powers, you know, but I think it actually was kind of beautiful in what it said about like finding peace and like sort of passing that to the next generation. And like with Claire, I really like how we find out about like the pills that she doesn't take very early on. And so I really like that sort of message that like that is what kickstarted her, you know, and like with Jonas, it was being trained by the giver. And Kira was like related to the embroidery. Like, so all the characters have this sort of like moment that sets them on this path, but it doesn't feel like they're the only people who could have done it. Like, does that make sense? Like, it's they're still special and they're still important, and I love them all so much. But I also appreciate that like Lois Lowry has that love for like everyone.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I love that you're talking about this, because as I mentioned, I don't really have a tight agenda for this discussion. I really just kind of like have some little touchstones of like, don't forget to ask about this, don't forget to talk about this aspect. And I did really want to kind of talk about like that sort of idea of like the chosen one trope versus like the kind of ordinary goodness that can arise in anybody. And I do think it's very interesting the way that plays into the gifts of the characters, and specifically that this is our only book in the series where our main character does not have a gift.
Yeah.
So I guess, would you like to let's unpack that a little bit and talk about Claire?
Yeah. I love that you pointed that out, because I don't think I had articulated that in my head. I love a deconstructed chosen one trope. So unsurprising that I really enjoyed Claire. But like looking at it through that lens too, it's like it's so cool that her sort of like super powered abilities is like love and like empathy, and like Gabriel's ability is more like magical empathy. But it's still basically like your superpower is like caring about people, and I feel like Lois Lowry is one of the authors who can so pull that off, and it doesn't feel cheesy, and it just feels like so beautiful. And the fact that like Claire does these amazing things, and she's so determined and she's so strong, and like I mean even like, so there's like the very physical challenges she does, but there's also the fact that like she's having to learn the world for essentially the first time in part 2, and like that takes an amazing amount of like strength and bravery. So I feel like actually Claire is sort of the perfect main character to end this series on, because she sort of like encapsulates what one of the things that we've been talking about with these books, which is that everybody has this in them. And even with some of the side characters, we kind of get glimpses of that, like in Gathering Blue, like Thomas is sort of like that, where it's like he's not as like suspicious from the beginning as Kira is, but he does start paying attention, and he does kind of have these moments of like, I don't think this is right, I don't think people are treating each other right, and that kind of thing. And even in this book, I was really surprised that the little bit we got of Jonas's father and about like taking care of Gabriel and like all of that. So obviously we know we saw him do something in the first book, but it was really interesting to me that in this one it felt a lot more clear that he didn't want to do it, you know, that maybe like even though he'd been raised in this and trained in this and he was willing to do it, like he would have done it to Gabriel if he needed to. But even underneath that, there was like this basic part of him that knew it was wrong, you know, because of even just the way that his his like dialogue and his mannerisms like on that last day.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I just keep trailing off and not finishing sentences.
I know. Well, there's so much in this book to talk about that. Yeah, it kind of goes everywhere. I'm just deciding what part of what you said I want to respond to first. Yeah, I do think it's very interesting the way she. Well, actually, you know what? What if I even veer away from my original first question? And what if we just start part one by itself? Since we're kind of chronologically there, anyways. Yeah, I think it is very interesting in part one when we are back in the timeline of the Giver. And we do get to see some different angles of that original story. And it does kind of play back into like when Jonas sees the video of his father performing a release, and he gets so upset, of course, by it. And the Giver is like, you don't understand, though. Like, to him, this isn't a matter of like, you know, like right or wrong or whatever. Like that's his job. That's a duty he performs. Like, he doesn't see it the way you do because he doesn't have the context of everything else and knowing all these things. Yeah, but we do see, kind of like you said as well, a little bit of that like fighting spirit of like, you know, well, there's no point of taking him home that last night, and he's still like, well, I'm gonna do it anyways.
Yeah, because that's like an illogical decision essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And that is pretty anathema to the community. And so it's like little things like that that I think are such interesting and important details to include. Like, even on these, you know, emotion suppressing pills or whatever they are, I kind of like that we're never told exactly. It's just like they dampen everything, you know. So even on those, like, humans are still humans. Like, there are like sometimes people can still sort of reach that instinct to take care of each other, that I think is really beautiful.
Right. And I think even to an extent, even though the community is so sterile seeming to us, like there is a sense that like in the way she writes it, it's like you can never 100% get rid of like what is essentially like the quirks of humanity.
Yeah.
Like you can try to tamp them down, but it's like, well, you still get, you know, people that you assign to different jobs because you see this person's naturally nurturing, this person's inherently very curious, like, and those things about them lead them to these different areas that, you know, are still a little more clinical than how they are in our life. But
and people like joke with each other, you know, like there's those like little things about like, yeah, they're not definitely not as like free and emotional as humans would naturally be, but like you can't stop people from like making friends, you know, from like reaching out to people, even when it is like a very shallow and like surface level friendship, which we see Claire kind of noticing that difference once she's not on, like, because she never takes those emotion pills. And so we see that difference of like her on the outside, like, oh, this doesn't actually feel like it's supposed to. Like, I don't know what it's supposed to feel like, but I don't think it's this. But even with that, it's like people still reach out to each other, you know, like there's still like inside jokes at like the fish hatchery and things like that. And like there are still like, they tease Dimitri because he's been waiting for a spouse for like years. You know, like, it's funny.
It is funny. And it's also, okay, I'm going to start thinking too much about like the logical pieces of the community because I fall into this trap every time. But I'm like, okay, but genuinely, like if he's been waiting that long, like I don't know what they're going to do about it. Because like what, they're waiting for an appropriate wife to be old enough to marry him? Because no one's like moving to this community. Like I genuinely started thinking, I'm like, what? Or like, I don't know. I don't know what they would do.
Yeah, are they just sort of like internally? They're like, we can't ever match him, but we're not going to tell him. Like,
just tell him he's still waiting.
Yeah.
Dimitri, yes, you're on our list.
Mm-hmm.
Cross off his name.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was so interesting too, seeing the early scenes in part 1 with the boat arriving with whatever they had. I don't know, the delivery or whatever they were doing. That was a very interesting first glimpse.
It is wild to me that this series as a whole, it's like you realize like, and I, for some reason, I feel like this is unusual in like dystopians. I haven't read enough to know if that's true, but it feels unusual that like there are all these different communities and they're not all run the same way. And even though a lot of them seem to be oppressive and unhealthy, it's like in different ways. And it's like so fascinating to me that like there are communities that are more or less run normally, like, which I'm sure we'll talk about in part 2, but it's like they're like trading with these other places that are like, man, those people are nuts, but yeah, we'll tell you what. Like it's so interesting and weird.
Yeah. And how bizarre must it be for them as people whose job is to like travel around to see these people who never have that opportunity? Well, actually, no, wait, because there's the field trip to another community that Lily goes on in
Right.
The Giver. So there must be multiple communities just like that community.
Right. I think it's very
are like, these are the ones we can go to because they're just like us.
Exactly.
It's still like bizarre to think about like how sheltered they must look to those outsiders who are like,
right,
you have no idea what else is out there, huh?
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, in a way it kind of makes sense because like whatever series of cataclysmic events like happen to make all of these communities, you know, function the way they are and like exist at all, it kind of makes sense to me that like, okay, one of the most basic things they must have decided is like non-interference, you know?
Yeah.
Is like when they were figuring out, I assume there was some kind of like agreement come to eventually about like, all right, you guys stay over here, you get this like area, we're gonna stay over here and live our way. So I guess that like, I don't know, like that would make sense to me that there was some kind of like policy of like, all right, we might judge you, but we can't do anything about it.
Yeah, very fascinating. And again, not to get too far ahead into part 2, but it also is very curious thinking about the physical boundaries between these different communities and what keeps them apart, whether it's a body of water or a cliffside or, you know, these things that it's, or, you know, a forest, right?
Yeah.
These things that separate them that are incredibly dangerous, and like how many of those were entirely natural, were some of these man-made, were these community locations decided specifically because they had those features like a fence. Like it makes one ponder, you know.
Sure does.
It's interesting stuff. What else about part 1? Oh my gosh, so much. I don't know, I guess this is going to come up in all of them, but I really enjoyed how much of this book really, and she used the actual word yearning so many times in this book. There was a lot of yearning, but there was like a lot of yearning for not just like Claire yearning for her son, but there was like various times where it was like this person longed to know about that or wanted to know or to have this knowledge. And I thought that was a very interesting tie-in as well to the rest of the series and what we've discussed there.
Yeah, I love a good yearn.
Yeah, so much of yearning. I do love it. And also, I guess, a little bit of romantic yearning too. I mean,
I know. Okay, since you mentioned it, I have a theory that Lois Lowry feels like she really can't write romance. And so she just like glosses right over it because it happens twice. It's like in the third book, we get this like little inkling about like two characters ending up together. And in this book, it's like, okay, skip forward like 15 years, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Also, are we in spoiler territory? I assume.
I think the whole thing is spoiler territory.
That's kind of what I was thinking. And then in Sun, the part where, like in part 2, where like Einar like says goodbye to her, and it's like, oh, he kissed her, and I'm like, he did what? Lois!
Pardon?
It's just like it's so funny, and I'm sure like when she's writing it, she's like, this is just a subplot. It's not that important, and it's like, Lois, give the people what we deserve. Mm-hmm. Let us have this little bright spot of happiness. Like,
oh my gosh, I know, and it's so interesting to me too, thinking about, like you said, we kind of get that time jump in this book. So already, Claire starts a little bit older at 14 than protagonist. Jonas is 12. I think Kira. I also thought she was 12, but then in this book, they seem to imply that she was 14 in the events of 4 books. So I was like, okay, I'll allow it. And then Maddie somewhere thereabouts. So she starts a little bit older, but then we have like a 6-year kind of jump to when she's 20. I'm like, that's a lot of age that we're going over. And at first I was like, what an interesting choice. And then I actually thought about it, and I was like, actually, that makes perfect sense, because her readers who would have read The Giver when it came out are totally like age appropriately like ready to read about a character exactly like that. So I was like, Lois, maybe you're a genius. Like, it's so smart.
It is smart.
Yeah, I just thought that was very interesting on her part. Wow. I like literally, every time I want to talk about something, I'm like, no, stay on one topic for a minute. But this book it encompasses so much. Do you have anything else specifically in part 1, like in the community, that you want to?
I mean, just like sort of the obvious observation. Of how horrifying the whole like birthing center is, and how like mechanical it is, and the fact that she was 13 when she was, I guess, inseminated, like, and the fact that like, and Claire even thinks about it in these terms one time, that she was like, the other girls who were only fit as like breeding stock or something. Mm-hmm. And I feel like part 1 did a really excellent job of like not dwelling on like details of it, like it wasn't explicit, but it was horrifying. Like, I mean, even the mask thing, and how it's like, oh, we don't let them look at the child because that can like, create feelings that we don't want to.
God forbid they feel connected. Yeah.
So I just think it was very effective. And I think my first tab in this book is when Claire is getting like reassigned, and her like supervisor says like, oh, you're a quick learner, you'll catch on. And I'm like, that's not what you said earlier. Like, I don't know, it just gave me a lot of feelings that like nobody is fit only for breeding stock, and even the people that supposedly the community has selected for that, like, they even know that, once again, not making sense, just in my feelings, but
yeah, the opening of the book is a lot to process right off the bat. It is like so creepy and sad, and just, again, a dark, no matter what, just based on the circumstances, but then thinking about how young she is like extra horrifying. And it also, I don't know, part of me is like, Lois, I do need you to explain that one to me, because there's no way all these brilliant scientists were like, yes, 13 years old will be the prime age for healthy birthing. I'm like, I don't think so, actually. So on that account, I'm like, actually, wait a second. But
yeah, I feel like maybe there could be, I don't know, maybe we're supposed to assume that there's some like medical advancements that make that true. But yeah, I'm like, but like, it's not true. Like in the modern world today, it is not safe for girls that young to experience childbirth. Like, yeah, so that is a good point.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just very eerie to think about that circumstance of like you're told that's your job and you get, you know, essentially, well, not 3 years because I guess there's like, well, I guess close to 3 years, yeah, of like a very quote unquote pampered life other than the actual childbirth aspect of things. And then they just reassign you wherever they need people. Like that's like, it's so creepy.
Yeah, and even like the language around it of like you're a vessel and the product. What's that?
We both said the product at the same time.
Yeah, and I think like the one that I found like most, I guess like enraging and upsetting, like all of it is, but I think even more than product, because that is something where it's like that's a horrible thing to call, you know, a child, but you can see how their very mechanical perspective would, you know, like I feel like there's a tiny bit more you can rationalize that one, not that it's okay, but like vessel makes me see red. Like you exist as a thing that we put babies in.
Yeah.
You know, like that just, yeah, good choice, Lois, because I'm curious.
Yeah, it's a really impactful word because vessel just inherently sounds so hollow, and like no human being is empty and waiting to, like, you know, be filled with, like, a person is already a full person. They're not just this vessel.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a very effective word choice. And yeah, it's so heartbreaking to me when Gabriel in his older years is like, well, of course I have a mom. Everyone has a mom. And to hear it, you know, described to him so plainly, like, well, yes, you do, but it's not like that. You were a manufactured product, is like, poor boy, poor baby. I feel like you reminded me of something else, and now I don't know what it was. I'm sure it'll come back if it was important. Let's talk a little bit about part 2. The best part of the book, in my opinion.
I agree. We're both like, so many thoughts. Like,
yeah, I think part 2 is, it feels the most like it could be a place that exists here and now, or on this earth in the past even. Like it feels the most relatable as a setting. Like the what I was about to say like gave me half a glimpse of the thing that I forgot. Now I already forgotten it. But the sort of like social conventions are very, like, you know, kind of what they are. It's like, oh, a child out of wedlock, shame, shame. Oh, this, that, you know, like the way they feel about things just felt like, yeah. Oh, I remembered. Okay. Okay, this is about every part of the book. I really want to talk about moms, motherhood, obviously a huge part of this book, but specifically, I had a hard time for a while trying to pin down what Lois did want to say about motherhood and childbirth, because in the beginning of the book, I was like, I feel like we could be leaning in a very weird direction that's not very pro-choice, you know what I'm saying? That like made me feel like kind of ick. But then the farther we got into the book, I was like, okay, wait, actually, I like what she's saying here, because in part 2 we get, and I don't know how you chose to read her name, because I have met a girl in high school, the like herbalist lady.
Yeah.
Did you do an Alice? Did you do an Elise? What was your feelings on that?
I think I said Alice, but I kind of just
Alice.
glossed over like.
Yeah, I know, right? Great, we're gonna call her Alice. She had that line that I'm sure you're already like, where she was like, let's just find it. Hold on. Instead of me trying to paraphrase. Because obviously with so much of this book, with Claire being a character who is a mom and wants to be a mom, that the language can feel like, oh, that's like her purpose, and that's her, like desire and her drive, which obviously is not a sort of thing you would want to say as a blanket statement about all people who are able to give birth.
Right.
But hello, anyone? Oh wait, I gotta look for the right color. Idiot. This one? Yeah. No. Okay, found it. But she, first of all, speculated, and I didn't even think about this, that when they did the surgery to Claire after failing to deliver, that they removed or somehow, made her unable to have children, which didn't even occur to me until she said that. I was like, oh, I thought this was just a C-section. So
yeah, I had the exact same, like, good point, Alice. Oh, like.
And then I also second guessed it too, because I was like, oh yeah, like, it's just everyone in, like, either married couples in the community just have like no physical relations because the pills take care of that stuff, or like they are all sterilized, which is an alternately creepy concept.
Right.
Because they have assigned birth mothers. I mean, like,
what's that?
Because you have assigned birth mothers. You don't need other people to do that.
Yeah. Which also, so okay, now I'm like, I have so many things I want to respond to.
No, sorry.
No, it's great. One thing that this book also made me think about is like, okay, so they have to obviously get the, like, what they use to fertilize, like they.
Yeah.
So that means that either there is some kind of selection process for boys that is much less invasive and that doesn't affect their future career, which I think is commentary in itself.
True.
Or it's just like a thing that everybody does and the community like figures out what combinations would be. But it's like that's really interesting to me, that like knowing how this, like we get some details about how it actually happens with Claire, and so it's like, so this means that something similar but very, very different is probably happening with the boys of the community.
You're so right.
Which again, I feel like is very interesting and subtle commentary on the very different ways that like having children affects men and women in the workplace. Yeah. And then the other thing I was going to say is like, I know what you mean about like not being sure which direction we were going to go in. One thing that I was kind of like, I guess like worried about or thinking about at the beginning was kind of like you were saying, like Claire was so immediately devoted to her child just because she had like given birth to the child. Like she didn't have any bonding time with him. Like there wasn't even, like, we don't really get a chance to see why unless it's some kind of, like I know there is this like instinctual bond that a lot of like mothers experience with their kids. And so I was a little worried that that would come off as, like you said, that this was like what this was her purpose, or this was like her highest like wish, is that she would be reunited with her child. But like as it went, I was like, actually this kind of makes sense, because she has had she's not on the like emotion suppressing pills, and her only outlet for all of this love and all of this empathy and all of these like emotions is her child. So like, not to undercut how much she cares about him, because obviously she does, but like it made it less like concerning to me, I guess, because it's like, oh, this is sort of like an attachment situation, you know, like she had nowhere else to kind of put all of that emotion that nobody else is experiencing. So that I think sort of like put my worries to rest a little bit. And then the other thing that reassured me about that is that like I feel like throughout the book we are pretty consistently shown that other characters, or even like the narration of the book, like about what happens to Claire without her consent, is horrific. Like even, well, I shouldn't say even, I guess, but like the community in part 2, like the village, even though they have some sort of like, I don't know, social mores that are like more old fashioned and everything, like Alice and the young mother whose name I can't remember, like they are both like absolutely horrified and like grieving on behalf of Claire because of the things that happened to her that she didn't choose, and specifically about how young she was too. And so like all of those things put together, I feel like for me, I was like, okay, I think there are some ways that Lois Lowry could have been clearer maybe about like the perspective she was taking, but overall I feel like this book is really like, yes, it is like kind of celebrating the like love and sacrifice a mother has for her child, but with the undercurrent of, if that is what you want, you know. And then sorry I'm talking so much. Then the other sort of thing related to that is that I like that at the very end Gabe makes a very reciprocal sacrifice, and so I feel like having the mother-child thing balanced out by like a child's love for their mother, I feel like was good. I think that really like, yeah, brought it home. And it was also just like so beautiful and emotional. So anyway, that was my monologue that was not really answered.
A monologue in return for my monologue. Yeah. Yeah, because Alice even says that, you know, when they rescued Claire from the water and she, you know, had to like clean her up and take care of her, like she saw the scar, but she didn't assume it had anything to do with childbirth, because she was like, you were so young. Like, I just thought it was like you were cut on something. Yes. And she does have that line where she explicitly says there are other ways a woman finds worth, in a firm, mellow voice. So I was like, okay.
MVP. I loved her so much. Like, actually, multiple favorite characters of mine were in part 2. So
yes, which I think is probably why we both love part 2 so much.
Yeah.
But
as soon as Einar was like introduced, and it's like, and now he's like very quiet and he just takes care of the animals, and I'm like, I love you.
You're like, oh my God.
I could just feel the like emotional backstory we were going to get. I could like predict it, and I'm like, I already am feeling it. I already love you. Sorry, go ahead. I just interrupted you.
No, I knew who you wanted to talk about, so I was like, go ahead, let's go there. Yeah, his backstory is so sad, actually.
And he's so like gentle and caring, and like, so all the bad things that happen to him, not that like suffering makes you a good person, because like that's a very problematic view, but it's like he's one of those people who like you could understand if he had become bitter, you know, because of all he suffered, and instead he became like the most selfless and loving and compassionate person. I love him so much.
Yes. I'm trying to find. Oh, apparently it's a Doctor Who quote. I didn't know this. There's, as a Tumblr girly, you get a lot of like edits in different fandoms, right? That are like, oh, like text over the character and all these different scenes and, whatever. And apparently this is a quote from Doctor Who that I've seen several times and I just never knew it was from Doctor Who. But people will use it over, like their character, their baby, right? And it feels so apropos here, where it's just all that pain and misery and loneliness, and it just made you kinder. And I'm like, yeah, that's our boy.
Yeah, I remember that one. That's a good line.
And it is like, I don't even want to like go into it too much, but I was already gonna be sad, right? Because I'm like, oh, like you're a loner, you're like disabled and working through that on your own. Father obviously was terrible, and then when he fully goes into the story and the extent of the abuse, it was like horrific. And I know 100% that the first time I read this, I did not clock the line about the nature of the abuse. And so that was also devastating.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And he's so supportive is like such a lukewarm word for it, but he's so supportive of Claire. And like, even when he's only heard like the rumors that like, oh, she's a loose woman, it's like he doesn't judge her at all. Like, it's not even like, oh, I don't think it's true, she wouldn't do that. It's like, maybe it is, doesn't change who she is as a person.
Exactly.
And Alice also responds that way. And I think there's like maybe a hint that some other people may be thinking that as well, but like, yeah, and just the way that he is like, really, like Lois Lowry was like fighting back against toxic masculinity before that was really a thing. And I just love that. Although I will say, like, the other guy who I don't remember, who's like,
Anders.
Anders, yeah. Even him, I appreciate that he wasn't like this cartoonishly evil monster. Like, when he shows up and he's like, oh, I claim her, I'm like, disgusting, I hate you. But even though he is like awful to Claire about what he finds out, he like, I was really worried it was gonna be like a Goose Girl attempted assault situation. I was really worried about that from the way he was introduced. And so I appreciate that wasn't. Like, he was a jerk and he obviously needs to work through some things, but he's not like that specific type of evil that we get so often just to provide conflict for a female main character. Right. And I really like that. Like, I admired Lois Lowry for that.
Yeah, when he got introduced, I think I told you this in a message where I was like, oh my God, thank God. I thought he was like 34 years old and he's Claire's age. Like, phew. He was like 1 or 2 years older there.
I was also really worried about that.
Like, I don't know. The only descriptor I have is he's tall. Like, I don't know how old he is.
And he like shows up with all the other like middle-aged or older men that are like helping move stuff. I'm like, big yikes.
Yeah, so thank God, just a wee teenager. But yeah, I do think I'm very happy that there was nuance there, that we get like the scene with the scarecrow, where it's like a normal interaction, like where it's like, oh yeah, if I see my crush, like, oh, you want to help me work on this little project? Like, that's like
a scarecrow with me.
We can get a little pine sap to make the grass hair stick. Isn't this romantic?
Yeah.
And I guess like even to an extent, right? I'm assuming this village is so small. We're hearing about the same characters all the time. So if I'm like a teenager and a hottie shows up washed up on the beach, I'd be psyched. I'd be like, of course I'm gonna marry them. Yes.
So a new person? Yeah,
fair enough, I guess.
Yeah.
I almost thought in part 1, I was like, is Claire gonna get a crush on this boatman who just shows up? Because I'm like, who are you?
I know, I thought so too. I was like,
who's this? And then he's in like that one scene and we never see him again. But
right, unimportant boatman. Forget about him.
But there was potential there. Okay.
I know. I caught the same vibe.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my gosh. What else was I going to say? But yeah, obviously still a character who needed, as a person, not as a character. As a character, he was a developed character. Like as a person, someone who you would want to see grow and change. And
he has some work to do. Yeah.
But, got married and got over it, I guess. So good for you.
And like, I just love so much that that's something that really extends to, I feel like all of the characters in that village, that it's like, yeah, some of them are like petty or bitchy to her, but it's like, I don't know, a reasonable amount almost. Yeah. Like I really like that for the most part, the community is like, oh my gosh, this terrible thing happened to you. Of course you can stay here. And I hope you remember who you are, but like, we're not gonna kick you out. We're not gonna make you miserable. Like the sort of like, obviously with the rumor or I guess half the truth that got out.
With the gossip.
The gossip, yeah. The way people treated Claire after that was obviously like harsher. But even with that, I was kind of worried it was going to be like the extreme that we so often see, where it's like, stone her, stone the adulterous woman.
Or even like Kira at the beginning of Gathering Blue, like with that like targeted harassment. But it wasn't even. It was like they all judged her, and then after a couple of years, they got over it.
They're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that rumor. Like, it felt very like real. Like, yeah, this is how like a gossipy village, they would be all up in your business about this for like, a while until something else happened that was juicier, and then they'd be like, oh yeah, Claire, she's all right. Like,
and it's also so weird. I mean, I guess they could have the excuse that like, oh, Claire has amnesia, maybe she's changed or whatever. But I mean, from the characters we see who don't judge her based on the news that she has had a child, it's like, this is someone who has been living here, who you're very familiar with. Like, don't you think you know her personality? And if she was this loose, wanton woman that you're so worried about, like, wouldn't you have seen that by now? Like, I don't know. It's just weird how people act.
Yep. I loved the 3 little girls who are like friends. And you know what? Points to Lois Lowry for making me realize an assumption I had made. When they're talking about these like 3 playful kids getting into mischief, I assumed they were boys. They are they are mischievous little girls running around and getting into everything, and I love them for it.
They're so precious.
Yeah. And like this was, sorry, I feel like I keep repeating this, but this was like yet another example of like, I was sort of bracing myself, sounds extreme, but I'm like, okay, we're gonna have the like 3 girls who are friends, but they kind of bully each other because of course girls just can't be. And like, no, they're great. There's one of them who's like a little more shy, but the other 2 aren't mean about it. It was a good time. Thanks, Lois.
Yeah, they're so precious. And she used them so strategically too, as another way of sneaking in the importance of literature and literacy. I was like, Lois, you've done it again.
Oh, Lois.
But yeah, it's just very interesting to learn that, in that village, like nobody can write, so surely nobody can read. And so like all their knowledge and like history must be passed down orally. Like that's a lot to think about as another layer of this other place. But likewise, Claire is surprised to learn like, oh, they don't know letters. But at the same time, like looking at the village as a whole, it's not a place that like the reader is supposed to view as like backwards or like, you know, like she's still like, this is a very functioning society and like knowledge is important. But like, look, there are those other ways that knowledge is passed along, like when Alice is training Claire and then eventually little girl number one, whichever one she is.
Yeah. I agree. I think that like the village in the second part, like when we're first sort of introduced to it, I was like, oh, maybe this is going to be like Kira's community, because it felt like sort of a similar, like almost like time period feeling or like level of like infrastructure, you know, and like development and stuff. And I really like that it's not that, like you said, they are a functioning society. Knowledge is important to them. They're not like preventing people from learning things. They just don't have access to some of the tools that they would need for that. So like I thought that was really well done, that like we are shown that, you know, they don't have the same kind of extreme painkillers that Claire's community has, for example, but
electricity.
Right, they don't have electricity, but like Alice is incredibly smart. She's a very good like healer, and like physician, I guess. And it's like they have knowledge. Like they are, as you said, they're not like this backward little like podunk village, you know, full of like unwashed peasants. It's like they're like real people. Like they're very humanized. Which obviously people in like those communities are also human, but I feel like the way that they're often written about isn't. So
right, like if you look at whatever the other side of Kira's community, like where Matt was raised and stuff, like that is very obviously supposed to be seen as like, oh, these people do not have it together. Like they are uneducated and smelly and mean and like every bad thing you can imagine, right? Like but yeah, you don't get that feeling at all from this village. Should we talk about the whole like Rocky training montage and like the cliff ascent? Because I was like, I don't remember any of this. My mind was
it's like very, very I'll make a man out of you vibes as well. Yeah, but like I love, like I'm not a fan of a training montage in general. So I was very impressed that this one kept me pretty interested. Like, yeah, by the time she was actually ready to climb the cliff, I'm like, okay, I'm ready for this. Like we can move on. But like I loved Claire and Einar so much, and I feel like even though yes, it was about training, we'd get these little like tidbits of like character development and like things about like the village and what other people are doing. And so like it wasn't like just the training stuff, even though that was important. So like I really like that. I will say it was nerve-wracking, of course, you know, when she was actually making the ascent. I was shocked, even though I shouldn't have been, and I understand why she did it, when she threw the baby birds off the nest. And I'm like, oh my God, thematically, this is so like dramatic. Because she essentially is sacrificing another creature's children or young in order to reach hers. Like, Lois, your brain. Like,
well, yeah, and just the fact that she knows as a mother desperate to get to her son no matter what, she's like, that bird is not going to care about me. That bird is going straight after that nest. And like she did that. Like, I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
I know. I honestly, I did not see that coming, and was pretty shooketh.
To say the least.
Yeah.
And it's so wild, I guess, when they first talk about climbing out and like the concept of it in the village, I thought it was like a phrase, like a turn of speech. I didn't think they were climbing physically out of their geographic location.
Yeah.
So the fact that
they live in a crater surrounded by danger. Like,
yeah, it's like water on one side, cliff face on the other. Best of luck, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, it's I don't know. It's a very tense and dramatic scene. I don't know, something about the tension of her trying to scale that cliff makes me think of like the ending of Holes when they're like going through the desert and stuff. Like that's what it makes me feel.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Same energy.
Intense. And I like it too because it kind of mirrors, I mean, all of the books, right? Like everyone has to get out of this place, and it's a very treacherous journey to get to their next destination, even though Kira's doesn't happen in her book. Like that's still true for Kira's story.
Yeah.
So much to think about, the parallels. I was going to say dive into part 3, but start by talking about the trade master.
Yeah, like
oh my god.
So, okay, this is funny because as we have discussed in previous books, it was always kind of like, is this magic or is this like just written about in a way that makes it feel like magic? Like what's going on here? Because this seems like the only part of this story that is like magic powers, maybe. So I think by the time we got to this last book, because I was like, oh my god, of course the person on the cliff is the trade master. Like I didn't think, it's not like I predicted that before it happened, but as soon as it was told to us, I was like, this guy just won't leave. He just like won't leave.
I was like, this bitch again. Great.
Exactly. But like, so by the time we get to the end of the book and we finally get an answer about like how much is like supernatural or whatever, I was like, I guess so pleasantly surprised that we got any kind of definitive answer that I'm like, oh, you're the embodiment of all evil? Okay. Like,
I'll take it.
At least there's an answer.
Truly, like it's a bit of a broad answer. However, like I would rather that than just be like, it's this really like super powerful evil man. Like I'd be like, what? I don't understand that. But just to be like, it's a culmination of all the badness in the world. I'm like, I can work with that. Yeah.
Right. I was like, okay, that tracks at least. Yeah. Like it at least fits into the other information that we had gotten. And because I would have found it so much more frustrating if we never got any kind of confirmation one way or the other of like, is there some kind of supernatural element? And so having an answer that like, yes, there is, but specifically in this way, I was like, okay, that kind of makes the questionable magic powers make sense. I can work with this. Mm-hmm. Also the part at the end, like the confrontation scene and how like Gabe ends up winning it, very much reminded me of some of Madeleine L'Engle's books. I don't know if you've read the Wrinkle in Time books, but that is like classic Madeleine L'Engle of like being defeated by the power of love. But not in a cheesy way, in a way that gets me in my feelings.
Yeah. So. Well, even the journey across the river, when Gabe is internally discovering, he's like, I can't fight and kill this man. Like, I don't, like, that's just not within me. Because, and it's like so clearly to the reader, like two wrongs don't make a right. But it's so powerful how it is presented in that like his journey across the river instantly gets easier. Like the tide light lessens and the moon comes out, so there's more light, and it's like it's just very beautiful the way it's done. I love it.
It is, and I think like it's set up like surprisingly well. Like I mean, I wasn't expecting his like realization to have a like physical effect on his environment or anything, but like I actually really like how that sort of builds on the idea of the trade master himself, because like what he takes from people is like their humanity or their honor, their goodness, you know? And so by Gabe refusing to give up the Trademaster has no power over him. I'm like, that is so beautiful and also really smart. Like that makes sense. Like if he like feeds on the worst parts of people and he takes away the best parts, if Gabe refuses to play that, the Trademaster can't make you trade, you know? Like I thought that was so cool, and as you said, a very like beautiful moment, and the way it was described and everything. And all the cutaways to Claire, I was like, I swear to God, Lois, if she dies like before, I was especially coming out of Messenger.
Yes.
I was like, I can't do this again.
I know. I was like, either option would be bad, right? Like either Gabe defeats all the evil and then comes back and doesn't have his mom, or he sacrifices himself to defeat the evil and then Claire's like, I'm alive without my son, which is the whole point of the book. Like I would have been livid.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I feel like we earned that. We earned this happy ending here.
Yeah. But yeah, I did, I guess kind of since we're talking about the final battle a little bit, kind of going back into that idea of like the chosen one and dismantling that trope, in a sense. There is the scene. Oh, this isn't even the scene I thought it was, but it's appropriate. It's actually a flashback when Gabe is talking to Maddie. I thought I had marked a scene where he was talking to Jonas. But Maddie had told him that he must make himself ready. Someday you'll be called upon for something special, maybe something dangerous. So you have to prepare yourself, Gabe. You'll need knowledge. And I like that. It sounds like a very chosen one kind of speech to be like, you'll have to face this and you need to be ready. But the idea of like you don't know what that big moment in your life is going to be. All you can do is like prepare who you are, like your character, your body, your gifts, your talents, your relationships, and you'll need strength and you'll need knowledge to face whatever that is when it comes, is more universal sounding than it seems at first. And I liked that.
Yeah. And I feel like another thing that about that part that kind of pushes back against the chosen one idea is that, like, yes, there are, like, each of these main characters have like individual moments where they do this, you know, like they each, I think, face the final battle more or less alone, but none of those things would have been possible or necessary if the others hadn't already done it, you know. So it's like an individual contribution to a like bigger fight, like a bigger ideal, which is also extremely Madeline L'Engle. And I'm kind of curious now if like either of them not necessarily was influenced by the other, but like was familiar with them and was
Are you
like,
two friends?
Yeah. Do you know right? It's like our themes really vibe, like so yeah. I thought that was well.
True. Oh my gosh, what else about part 3? You know what I really liked about part 3, actually? I liked, and I don't know if it was just because we call him Jonas instead of Leader now. Jonas felt like Jonas again. He did.
Yes.
Book 3 Jonas, we were like, who is this guy? But this Jonas, I was like, yeah, this is believably our Jonas grown up. Like, I was fully back into believing in him, and it made me happy.
I agree.
And I know you and I have personally. Go ahead.
What's that?
I was gonna say we've personally discussed it, but very emo about their kids' names still.
I know. I just got emo for a second when I was thinking about. I was like, Gabe actually has like 3 parents. Like, I was like, he's got his mom, and he's got Kira, and he's got Jonas, and he had Maddie as a big brother, and I'm like crying on the floor, like.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that is like one of the big successes of this story overall is just how much I feel for all of these main characters. Like I feel very deeply attached to all of them. I do love them all. Jonas will always be my favorite and number one. However, it's like they hit me right here, those kids.
I know.
Oh my gosh. What else? Not about a particular part, although I guess that's not true. I guess it's mainly about part 2. Again, Lois just can't stay away from her naming conventions. She does love them, doesn't she? She's like, what if everyone has an adjective before their name?
Yeah.
But it fades away. So I was like, wait, so do they do this or not? Like,
I know it's like sort of inconsistent. Like,
yeah.
Well, at the beginning, some of them are just like so generic. Like it's like old Benedict or something.
He's the only old person.
Which, okay, side note, I loved Benedict out of all proportion to how much he was in the book. Like, right. What a decent, like...
The scenes with him and Alice are so cute.
They are. And he's like, wait, I don't remember why we were dancing. And she's like, I do. Like... Yeah, but I also, it's funny because, like, yeah, in a way it's like, oh, a little sad because they loved each other, they didn't end up together, but it's like the way that Alice and Benedict are like talking to each other and remembering it doesn't feel sad. Yeah. Like they both ended up really happy, and like specifically I really like that Alice never comes across as like, well, I couldn't get married, so I did the best I could. Like, no, she is living her best life. Mm-hmm. Like she's not just incredibly competent, but she seems genuinely happy with her job and like her place in the community. And I also like anytime there was a reference to like, oh, after all these years, Alice has a daughter after all, I'm like
I know, that's what I was gonna say, is that like I never got the sense that she felt like she missed out on being somebody's wife or whatever. But maybe that she felt a little sad about never being someone's mother. So like having an adoptive daughter was like a really beautiful way to play that up. And yes. Oh my gosh, the scene, we'll probably read it later, but the scene when the fire goes out and Claire comes into the to like warm her up and she's like, your mom must really miss you. I'm like, no, don't do that to me.
Because like Claire answers like, oh no, she didn't, I can guarantee it. And Alice is like, how is that possible? And I'm like, yeah. And I think it's a really perfect like counterbalance to this book focusing so much on Claire as the birth mother of Gabe. I think it's really awesome and really important that we get all of these relationships that are like more adopted family or found family that are shown as equally strong and equally important. And like there is no doubt that Alice is more of a mother to Claire than her parental units ever were, you know?
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, like, and Claire knows that too. And so I really like that we have so many examples. Like, even Gabe is like, Jonas is sort of this combination of his like adopted dad and also adopted big brother. Like, I think that's really cool that we have so many different examples of familial love. And even though like Claire's like her traditional sort of family love is like the center of the book and it's depicted in a way that is like very intense, I feel like the story reasons for that make sense, and it doesn't, I feel like, come at the expense of other ways of having family.
Yeah, that's so true. I got very misty-eyed in the middle of you talking because I thought about there's the moment in this book when Jonas specifically says, like, there was a man that I loved that I had to leave behind, talking about the giver. I'm going to cry now. Which, well, also, I marked it because he was like, I don't even know what he was like, he had to stay because I had to do the journey on my own. And I was like, that was not the reason, but pop off, I guess. Like, whatever you want to tell yourself.
I had kind of like a moment at that part too. I was like, is that why? I'm pretty sure that it just like didn't go according to plan, but okay.
And he was staying to help the community because he knew there was going to be turmoil. So he was like, go, release the memories. But
yeah. And again, like, this is something I think very cool that Lois Lowry does, where like the giver is obviously the title of the first book, but he's not the main character. But he's incredibly important, and none of the other books could happen without him. I think that is so cool. Like, you know what? I think if I had to describe like the feeling of like, I don't know, Lois Lowry's perspective or the flavor of these books, I'd be like, she is very anti, like, we are just cogs in a machine. She's like, no, like, all of us matter. We all have work to do. Get off your butt and figure it out. And I love her for it. Like, I think that's so cool. And I feel like this is, I think, something else we've already talked about, but like this series, I think, highlights so much how you can have a series that is hopeful, that is just as effective, if not more so, than, you know, like grimdark, or not even grimdark necessarily, but like where sometimes I swear it's like authors, they're like, I need to make sure this book is meaningful, so the end has to be really depressing. Mm-hmm. And Lois Lowry, it's like, it's not that she won't hurt your heart, because she will, but you always kind of like finish her books, perhaps except for Messenger.
Yeah,
feeling like better about the world and what you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
I just love that.
Yeah, every book in the series very much feels like this is the web of our community, and everyone affects everyone else, and you know, we all try to stand up for what we believe in. And I think there is, again, we'll probably read it when we get to quotes not too far in the future here, but there's like a line towards the end to the effect of like, fight for what you love. And I think in the context, I think so, I don't know, someone says it to Gabe, but I was like, but it's not meaning like his mom specifically. Like, I think they said it meaning like, go ahead, like fight for the love of your mom or whatever. It was probably the tradesman. But it really reads more as like this is what you believe in. Like, what you love is like standing up for the goodness in people. And I just think that's beautiful.
And you just what?
I just think that's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, isn't there even a part, I think in part 2, isn't there a scene where I think Einar either says it to Claire, or it's maybe like in the narration or something, but about like something about how Claire is going to make it, and he says like, you're like fighting for something, you're not just running away from the place that you left. And yeah, like I feel like that is very similar to the part you were talking about, where it's like fighting for something can be even more powerful than fighting against something, or like trying to get away from something. Like, I just it's real good. On a much less serious note, I found it kind of hilarious that when Jonas is like telling the whole story of like Claire and everything, like to Gabe, who like Gabe at this point, he knows that he has semi-magical powers. He knows that Jonas does. He knows all these other wild things, and he's like, the trade master? I don't think so. Like, he's like, that is a step too far, sir.
They're like, let's go talk to your teacher. He'll tell you about it. And I'm like, must we? Okay, I guess we're going to hear another perspective on it.
Yeah, and it was funny too, because like to my eyes, it didn't seem like the school teacher really did anything different than Jonas did. Like, he also just sort of told about his experience. I mean, I guess like maybe there was supposed to be a part of like, well, Gabe maybe knew him back then and he may have noticed something weird happen. I don't know. It was just kind of funny because it's like, we need an expert, and it's like he just did the same thing Jonas did, but this time Gabe is like, wow,
you're right. Yeah, I know. I do think because they talked a bit about like the physical changes that happened to him when he made his trades. He was like, "Oh yeah, we used to call you Rosie because you had your birthmark, and then it was gone." Whatever. Which Rosie is like honestly a very sweet nickname as long as the person with the birthmark is not offended by it. I think Rosie is so sweet. Yeah, it was an interesting part where I was like, "We have this many pages left, and we have to tell this story twice. Okay, let's go."
Maybe, Lois, we could have used some of those pages on a more satisfying ending instead of just cutting it off. But
perhaps,
you know, who am I to criticize? But yeah, it was funny. It kind of reminds me, it's like in fantasy books when it's like main character has magic, they're friends with an elf, like whatever, but they're like, dragons, they don't exist. Like, you foolish person. And I'm like, can we think about it? Like, I mean, I guess it'd be the equivalent of like, obviously in our world, like we have these incredible scientific advancements, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that if somebody described one to us that was like truly, you know, out of this world, unbelievable, like I guess I can see why you would still be skeptical, but I still think it's funny.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Dragons, they're just a legend. Now hand me my wand. Like,
okay, let me see if I have anything else. We talked about that. Let me see where I put down this page number.
I feel like I had a lot fewer tabs in this one because I think a lot of the parts that I was reacting most to were like about connections, like within the book or between books, and it wasn't.
Yes.
Like there weren't as many moments where I'm like, this encapsulates like a feeling about this book. But
yeah, my tabs specifically, obviously I did one for motherhood. Boring. And then I did one that was just, I just put emo girl. So like anytime I started to get sad, we threw one of those tabs in there. So there's a lot of that color. I did one for water, since that's obviously kind of an overarching motif throughout the book. One that is just parallels to or connections to the other books in the quartet. And then I had one for yearning and curiosity, because we mentioned that as well. But the last thing I had a note about in my phone was the very end, and I just love in the final battle where it goes down how, like you said, I mean, first of all, that Gabe is like using like the fact that the trade master has no power over him, like to his own like detriment, but also like because he realizes that like hunger that he has for people's like agony, I guess. I'm like, I don't know. That he uses such like common things in life to be like the victory against him. He's like, oh, that person, well, he's a good man. Oh, her, well, she fell in love. Oh, that, like, it's just like such easy, simple things that defeat the evil. And I was like, well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was so beautiful. And again, like when that kind of thing is well written, like this is, it's like I don't think it feels like cheesy or unearned. Like the fact that Claire is able to survive and she has the like old age thing like reversed. I like, yes, obviously happy ending. Thank you, Lois. We deserved one.
Yeah.
But also like I think it actually really makes sense with what's been set up, because we know from the school teacher that these things can be reversed. And I also like Claire, and I assume anybody else who had made it out of the village, like they were not trading for something that was like selfish, you know, like, so I feel like that sort of thematically makes sense with Claire being able to kind of get back herself. And also the fact that like I feel like this last chunk of the book, it sort of shows like the difference between like giving away part of yourself like in a negative way versus like true sacrifice, you know, or like true selflessness. And because Claire acted from selflessness, I was like, yeah, like that makes sense to me why with all of this like symbolism, like that she would be able to get it back. Like I think that works.
Love that. Okay, well, we're both kind of staring at our books and brainstorming. Yes. So let's find some quotes that we would like to share.
Let's do it.
There were, I will admit, for this being such a long book, I feel like this time a lot of my tabs more are, again, like thematic or motifs and not necessarily like, oh, this was my favorite quote that I wanted to share. So I'll probably be flicking through quite a bit. So if you find something, just jump in here.
Yeah. Do you want me to go first? Do you want to go first?
If you find something before me, go for it, because I am just flipping.
Okay. This is about Claire realizing that because she's not taking the pills, that she's like having emotions. She would not let them take that from her, that feeling. If someone in authority noticed the error, if they delivered a supply of pills to her, she thought defiantly, she would pretend, she would cheat, but she would never, under any circumstances, stifle the feelings she had discovered. She would die, Claire realized, before she would give up the love she felt for her son. Like, I just think that says so much about, like, not just that she would die for her son, which she obviously would as well, but that she would die before giving up the feeling she has. Like, yeah. Also, I love the use of the word defiantly. And I think we might have mentioned this in a previous discussion, but like all of these like rebel kids are like motivated by love. And I just think that's neat.
Yeah. Yeah, the little meme of us holding the Giver Quartet. I just think it's neat. Exactly. Yeah. I don't even know. There are some things where I'm like, are you brilliant and is this intentional or accidental word repetition sometimes, where there's like a part really early in the beginning when she describes Claire as feeling apprehensive, and I was like, apprehensive, and I like lost it. And then there was another part, I think I actually put a tab on it, but I don't know if I can find it, where like Jonas just he did something firmly, and it reminded me of when that like amazing quote from the Giver that's like gently but firmly the Giver led Jonas deeper into the past, something to that effect. I said it badly, but I was like, firmly leading.
I know. I think in a lot of cases, I think it is intentional, because like Claire has that moment with apprehensive, but then later, I swear, and I don't think I marked it, which I should have. I think there's a part where Jonas is thinking to himself like, oh, it makes me feel apprehensive. And he's like, apprehensive. And I'm like, like Lois, I see what you did there.
Yeah. And also similarly, in part one, I'm like noticing these things as I see my tabs of like a lot of Claire being like, well, it's not a direct lie if I just don't say anything about it. And I was like, this is so Maddie right now. What are you doing? Like, yeah, very precious. See, again, not as many quotes saved for purposes as as in The Giver, which is why I think it continues to be my favorite book of all of them, is that I think it's just the most concise and precise maybe in its theming, and also just the quotations are chef's kiss.
Yeah.
I liked this description of living in the community in part 1. But she felt restless now and different in ways that she didn't understand. In keeping with the demands of her new job and its meticulousness, its constant analyzing, she tried to examine her own feelings. She had never done so before, had never needed to. For Claire's entire life, her feelings had been those of what? She searched in her mind for the right descriptive word. Contentment. Yes, she had always been content. Everyone was in the community. Their needs were tended to, and there was nothing they lacked, that was it, Claire realized. She had never yearned for anything before. But now, ever since the day of the birth, she felt a yearning constantly, desperately, to fill the emptiness inside her. And again, precision of language. We come right back around to it every time.
And I like too how that one that you read, that sort of supports like some of what we were talking about earlier, where like it kind of implies not that Claire's love for her son isn't genuine, but like part of the reason it is so intense and defining for her is that this is literally the first time she has had an opportunity to yearn for something or someone. This is the moment where I'm like, old Benedict, I am going to love you out of all proportion to how much you're in this book.
Yeah.
When they're rescuing Claire, it was actually old Benedict himself who carried her in once she was seen. Several, including tall Andros, swam out, but it was old Benedict who reached her first, slicing his way through waves with his burly, muscled arms. He pried her loose from the wood spar, for her fingers were locked there. He knew how to wrap her lifeless arms around his neck and to hold her pale chin high above the foam and spray. He had brought wounded sheep in from the field this way many times, holding them against his chest. Like, just that image of he's like this big, like, you know, wild-looking guy. He's so gently bringing in wounded sheep.
Oh, love it. Yeah, I forgot. That's the easiest way to introduce you to a character is talk about a time they rescued an animal. You're like, right. My favorite.
Exactly.
Oh. Let's see what we got here. Oh, scared myself.
Do you mind if I
do it? If you've got one, do it.
Okay. This is when Andros is like, hey, she's like old enough to get married now. And this is another example of like, again, I so appreciate that we're not just like, yes, the backwards community where everybody is like misogynistic and, you know, mistreats everyone. It was true that in this place there were often girls given as brides at that age. Even now the village was preparing for a wedding. Glenys, shy and sparkle-eyed, would soon wed horse-tender Martin. She not yet 17, and he barely 20. But old Benedict and Alice both said no, not this girl, not Waterclear. She must not wed, they said firmly, until the sea gave her back what it had stolen, until she knew what her life had once been. Like, yeah, and even when they're talking about like, oh yeah, women get married that young here, I like that the age gap is not that big. Like, especially in this time period, like a 16-year-old and a like 20-year-old would be seen as like essentially, you know, both adults.
Adults,
yeah. So I'm like, that's right, consent.
Yes. Yeah, and just that aspect, especially of being like, well, it doesn't matter how old Claire is, like, she doesn't know who she is. How could she possibly be like ready to marry someone if she doesn't know herself? So that's, I think, such an important part. Also from part 2, this is when, Alice, someone asked like, oh, how old are you, Waterclair? And Alice is like, she's probably 16 or so. She's like, listen, she doesn't know. I'm guessing she's 16. 16, Waterclair repeated in her soft voice. And though she said no more, They knew that she was mourning the knowledge of the years that the sea had gulped away. She watched the little girls at play, laughing as they ran through the meadow, quick and colorful as butterflies. But there was a sadness in the watching, for Claire's meadow days had been taken from her. They did not come back, even in dreams. Yeah.
Yep. This is one of the few I had marked where I'm like, yes, this is a great line that encapsulates like what this book is all about. And I believe, is it from my boy Einar, or is it from Alice, my other fave?
Yeah, which of my faves said this great line?
Everyone, yeah. When Claire's like afraid of like the birds, and then they get like Einar gets her a pet bird, or he builds the cage for it.
No, Anne catches the bird for her.
Oh, he does? Okay. Yeah. I was like, I thought so. And just this little sentence, fear dims when you learn things.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's it. That's the book.
There it is. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So good.
I also like, I think one of the other reasons that I liked part 2 so much is that like the characterization of Claire as like having no memory of who she is or where she came from, and being understandably frightened by like the world around her because she doesn't have any context for any of it, but also how she's sort of getting to like find this level of joy in it that she wouldn't have if it were familiar. Like I found that very like poignant and very moving, and I felt for her so much. And every time she had like a memory flashback or, you know, like a post-traumatic experience, basically, it was very, I think, well handled, and I just want to give her a hug. I love her.
And what a like interesting circumstance to have a character with amnesia too, because it's like, even if she didn't, or rather, even if she, I don't even know how I'm trying to say this. These are not even experiences she had in her community. So there's so little that can jog her memory.
Yeah.
That sadly, you know, it's like the traumatic stuff is mainly what comes first. But yeah, like every time they're like, surely you've seen a bird before. And she's like, I swear I have never seen anything like that in my life. Like,
yeah. And I'm like skipping ahead a little bit here, but like one of my favorite lines is like the list of things that Claire was like surprised by. Her list included lightning, which astonished her, thunder, which terrified her, and frogs, which made her laugh aloud. A rainbow one morning made her almost faint with delight and surprise. And that's a chapter ender.
I have something actually very similar that I'm looking at right now that is a little bit before that, but it's when they're asking, like, do you know this? Do you know this? She's like, I don't know these things. She resolved that she would learn. She would learn everything about queens, whatever they were, and herbs and birds, and how the men farmed and what they thought, and the women too, how they spent the hours, and what they talked about, what they dreamed, what they yearned for. Again, with the yearning.
That yearning. It gets
always me. The yearning. I love it.
When they're at the hand fasting ceremony, and she hears music for the first time. It says, Claire stood silent, awed by the music, puzzled by the concept of love, and moved by both the solemnity and the celebration of the occasion.
Mm-hmm. And I love in that section too, like her just trying to even fathom what music is. And she's like, how the sounds go together. It's like, oh yeah, that is.
It's so endearing. Like, also just want to point out that immediately after the line I read, she notices Einar standing.
Of course she does. Why wouldn't she?
I know.
Oh, man.
Yeah. I think this might be my last one. It's at the very, very end. And it's when the trade master is like trying to get Gabe to trade, and it's like not working, of course. And he's like describing like the ship that he would give him, like the boat. And he leaned forward and beckoned with a thin, gloved finger. Want it? Not long ago, Gabe would have wanted it very much indeed, but things had changed for him. A boat no longer held any appeal. He no longer needed a boat. His quest for belonging, for love, had ended when he had knelt by a bed and held his dying mother's hand.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting like emo just reading it, but like the idea of like the journey, like I don't know, like not even having to take the journey because you already found it, and I don't know. I just anyway.
Yeah, I know. I just end of sentence.
Like I'm tearing up right now reading that one. Like
I know. I think I spent the majority of the last part of the book just like wiping tears and then reading, like being like, I could cry again. Like, what is she gonna say? Just like waiting for the next line that would hit me, you know? I'm still kind of flipping my way through here to find the good stuff. I really like this interaction that's earlier in Claire's relationship with Einar. How do you say his name? I don't really know how to say his name.
That's how I've been saying it.
Great. I'll say it like that too then. This is when the one village lady who's always pregnant in the narrative is giving birth. That's her job, is to remind us about the moms, okay?
Yeah.
Alice had told Claire that men were frightened by birthing. She had watched lame Einar, though, help his ewes to bear young in early spring. He was both firm and gentle with them, and unafraid. Einar hadn't minded that she stood watching when she came upon the scene. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile, when he unfolded the damp legs of a newborn and set it wobbling on its feet so that it could nudge its mother for milk. They don't really need me, he told her gruffly. They can birth alone unless there's trouble. But it's nice you're there to help, Claire said. He's such a good boy. I love him.
As soon as like, I think it was like the first time we were even told about Einar and like just the barest like little bit of his backstory, and how like he used to be like not like a bully, but you know, kind of like swaggering and probably to make up, you know, from all the horrible things that he suffered, but that he had like changed, you know, and that he had become quiet, you know, and lonely. Anyway, so we were just barely introduced to him. I was that meme that like I'm in danger because I knew I would be so emotionally invested, and I was very worried after Messenger.
Yep. Yeah, I know. I can't believe that we don't get to reunite with him in this book. Like, I mean, I can believe knowing Lois, but like, can't you guys, now that you're together, mother and son, let's just journey on back, climb down the cliff.
Right. I mean, going down would probably be easier.
Down is surely easier than up.
Yeah. Like, you know, like I said on Goodreads, respectfully, Lois, you can't stop me from like, imagining this little happy reunion between them. So
I found the one scene that I referenced earlier where the fire goes out. So Claire climbs over to Alice to warm her up. You're a good girl, Alice murmured. Your own mum must miss you fierce. Claire was startled. When she tried, in response to Alice's words, to think of her mother, there was little that came forth. Parents. Yes, she had had parents. She could remember their faces and could even recall the sound of their voices, but there was little else. No, she told Alice. I don't think she loved me. Alice turned in the bed, and through the dim light of the last embers that glowed in the fireplace, Claire could see her bright eyes open in surprise. How could that be, child? Claire chuckled and hugged her. I'm not a child anymore, Alice. Maybe I was when you found me. I was a young girl then, but so much time has passed, Alice. I'm a woman now. To me, you're a child still, and a mum always loves her child. I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And sorry, when she goes to climb out and Einar says farewell, like I'll miss you, Water Claire, and she calls him Fierce Einar, which was his original.
I know. Oh, and then we get the like, and then he kissed her bye, and I'm like, Lois.
Yeah. Tickety dang.
Oh my god! Every time, well, I think I even sent you a picture of that part where it's like every time they were like training together, and it's like, and they thought about their fondness for each other and how it didn't matter at all, and I'm like,
what are you doing, Lois? Oh. Yeah, there's something about the word fondness. It is like right up there with earnest. It is a great word. Like, because I feel like fondness encapsulates so much, and it's not too physical, but nor is it too platonic or too romantic. It's like right in a sweet spot of like, fondness. Like,
yeah, I think what gets me about it is that it's so understated. Yeah. And it's like the kind of word you would use if you weren't admitting how much you cared about someone.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm fond of them. And it's like, that's what gets me about that word choice. It's a good word. Good word. I did find it, like, as a seasoned rereader of this series, I have a question. Yes. What is the deal with the blue eyes thing? Like, that we are sort of told multiple times about how similar Jonas and Gabe's eyes are. And it's like, I guess, are we maybe meant to think that Jonas's birth mother was related to Claire, perhaps?
So, in the first book, they talk a lot about that, and I think it's made to signify Jonas's capability for like seeing beyond. And so that initially I was like, oh, Gabriel can also probably see beyond. But then, of course, the books carry on and she's like, well, there's other gifts. So I assume it's just like people who have a gift for some reason have these blue eyes.
Okay. Or at least certain kinds of gifts.
Yeah.
That would make sense, I guess. You just reminded me of another thing that I loved.
Yeah,
which is that it's these little subtle things where like Lois Lowry doesn't make a big deal of pointing them out, but like you realize them and it's like, oh, crying internally, thank you. When it's like Claire arranges, like in part 1, she like arranges her whole day out of like getting to accidentally meet up with Gabe and Jonas's dad, and realizing that like, so obviously Jonas had been like, you know, feeding him memories and stuff. So like, we know that that's kind of like how he, even early on, was sort of growing up, like, I guess more well-adjusted. But like the realization that, oh, the other thing that was happening is that his mom was like teaching him to smile and like all this stuff. And it's like, Jonas didn't even know about that. And so like unknowingly, Gabe is getting just like showered in love from both Jonas and Claire.
Yeah.
And I love it. And neither of them even knew about the other.
Sorry, you just got me really emo because I'm like, wow, Gabe is the only baby in that community who like ever knew love. Like that's a lot to process.
Yeah.
So love it. Since I'm already crying, great. That primes me for this one. So in part 3, the reason I kept losing my marbles, just use my sleeve as a tissue if you don't mind, was once Claire had made her trade and was like this old lady and I guess fully realizing the consequences of that, which is the quote here. So I'll just read. But she's like watching Gabe working on his boat. Did he need to know, after all? He appeared to be a happy child. If she were to make herself known, to tell her unbelievable story, he would be stunned, uncomprehending. His friends might taunt him. Perhaps he would reject her. Or worse, perhaps he would feel obligated to tend to her in her remaining days. His carefree life would be interrupted. She would be a burden, an embarrassment. In the end, she decided that it was enough that she had found him. She would let him be, but she realized then the magnitude of the cruel exchange Trademaster had offered her. Through the years, she had watched Gabe. I'm losing it. Gabe grow from a mischievous boy. I'm trying to start saying it the right way because mischievous is not what the word is.
Oh, I always, yeah.
I know it's mischievous, but I saw an Instagram post. I'll get into it later. A mischievous boy into this quiet young man who now seemed to have a mission she didn't understand. Why a boat? The river was a dangerous thing. The village children could swim and play in the one protected section where the water was shallow and slow. But farther out and farther along, the water rushed furiously over sharp rocks. She had heard that there was a steep waterfall someplace, and fallen trees here and there that could easily smash the thin boards he was so carefully tying together with strips of bamboo. Claire was frightened of swift-moving water. She had reason to be. She had once lived beside a river, once beside a sea. Both had brought her heartbreak and loss. She did not want her son to be lost to the water. I'm so sad.
I know. Yeah, that whole part, and like the part after it, I think, when Claire's like watching him build the boat and thinking about like, oh, like, why does he want to get away? And it's like he's trying to find you.
Yeah.
We're trying to find each other. Like, oh my god. And yeah, and the one that I read about like, oh, he doesn't need a boat anymore because he held his mother's hand. Also, mom stuff, like, I'm really close with my mom, so that just like tends to especially get to me. So that part of this book was like prime for getting me in my feelings. But
oh man, I'm like, how much else can I read without being annoying? There's kind of tying into what you said earlier about Jonas being somewhere between like this father-brother figure for Gabriel. Claire remembered Jonas as a boy. He was too young for fatherhood then. Nevertheless, it had been he who had saved a baby sentenced to die because the little one was eager and curious and lively, because he didn't sleep. He was, what was the word? Disruptive. He didn't fit in. Jonas had risked his own life, sacrificed his future to bring him here. She wondered if he worried about Gabe now, about the frailty of the little boat he was striving to build and the dangers he would face if he somehow launched it into the river. Again, just like my Jonas Gabe feelings are really at their prime. Because that is like something I really wanted in Messenger, where I was like, if Jonas is here, you can't just tell me in one passing paragraph and there was a little boy named Gabriel. I'm like, no, that's his adopted son. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Okay, I have very few tabs left, so let's see if anything else. There's some more yearning. Oh my gosh, the scene where Gabe uses his power to get into this perspective of little baby Matthew to feel what it's like to be loved by your mom. Hey, why would you write that, Lois?
And then he's like, oh, but I recognized it.
Yeah.
I think I was. And I'm like, you were.
Oh,
yeah. Also, I am so... Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm just crying. Go ahead.
I also am. I think it's also partly the fan I have on my face. Half fan, half emotions.
A convenient excuse. Oh, my eyes are so dry from the fan.
Yeah, it's just the fan. I also was so relieved that Claire actually, she was like, maybe I should just go to my grave, not telling anyone. And then she's like, no, I'll tell Jonas. And I'm like, thank God.
Truly.
And then Jonas is like, okay, well, we have to tell him. Like, we have to tell Gabe. And I'm like, Thank you.
And we need to tell him immediately, please. Like, chop chop.
Because you are about to die, Claire. Like,
yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. In the scene when Gabe wakes up and they're like, he's like, where's Jonas? And they're just like, oh, he went to some old lady's house because she asked for him. I was like, she's dead. It's like losing it.
I know.
Ugh, the panic. Not worth actually reading the line, but the part where they're talking about Maddie's sacrifice that he makes, and then they're like, Kira like covered her face with her hands. I was like, don't do that to me. That hurts.
You know,
thanks.
It's like, I'm still not over it, so it makes me feel better that you guys aren't over it.
Yeah.
But also, I'm suffering. I also, like, okay, this just occurred to me, this connection, because I was thinking about how, like, you know, we don't get a ton of Gabriel's point of view just because, like, the book is pretty long and we only really see him at the end. Yeah. But we get, like, a little bit of a feel for him. And he's sort of, like, selfish in, like, the not mean way that, like, you know, kids or teenagers can be, like, that all people can be. Right. And so, like, when there's a point where he's like, oh, but I need to talk to Jonas. And he's like, I mean, that old lady's just going to die. He doesn't need to be there, like, kind of thing. And then, like, as soon as he finds out that it's his mom, he's like, I will do anything for her. And it made me think of, like, how Maddie, when we first meet him, he's very, like, I look out for myself. Nobody's ever taking care of me. So I have to, like, you know, do it myself. And then by the end, he's like, I am going to sacrifice myself so that the whole world can survive and be happy. Mm-hmm. Anyways, so that connection just occurred to me. Like, Maddie and Gabe both being, like, understandably selfish, you know, not, like, unlikable, but just kind of, like, you know, they're kind of the center of what they think about. Right. Because that's, like, how people are, especially at that age. And then it's like, nope, at the end, when it counts.
Yep. I guess here's one random one that I skipped over because I didn't tab it, but I saved it in my phone that I like. And then I'll be done. There was so much in the community that isn't part of our lives anymore, but that's what our memories consist of. Small things. I like that one. So any concluding thoughts you have?
As we both wipe away tears.
As promised.
I know. We did. We advertised truthfully.
Did we cry at every live show?
I'm not sure. We should. We could go back and check. I definitely think if we didn't, it was like crying adjacent.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I explicitly said this in a previous live show, but I am, like, so glad that you picked these, Julia, because, again, I didn't grow up reading them. It was, like, a book I knew a lot of kids had read and that they talked about and that was, like, had a big impact on them. But I don't know if I would have made a point of seeking them out as an adult because, as I have mentioned, I don't read a ton of dystopian.
And the cover is so ugly. Sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, it's been amazing. I love crying about these kids.
Me too. Yeah. I mean, I've said it once. I've said it 1,000 times. The Giver is my universal book recommendation. I could never meet you, and I would tell you, if you have to pick one book to read in your lifetime, read The Giver. I just love it. It has a very special place in my heart. And I am endlessly in awe that we have such equal feelings about every single book in this series. We're like, this one a little less. This one, what the heck? This one, okay, we're going stronger again.
Yeah. I know. I like, just in general, I'm impressed at how often we line up exactly when we have such different rating systems. I think that's very cool of us. Very impressive.
Yes, because it's funny that such different things matter to us in different proportions in books that we read, and yet somehow we're like, so overall 4 stars.
Exactly. I love it. So the next book we're reading. So now we're done with the Giver series, and we're moving into sort of part 2 of Julia as my guest for Non-Genre Book Club, which is when I picked 4 books.
Takeover.
That are rereads for me and that I think Julia could really enjoy. I actually have like an announcement where I talk about them, so I was gonna say I'll link it. This is not my video.
I can link it.
Okay, cool. So the one that we're going to be reading next is A Sitting in St. James by Rita Williams Garcia. It's also going to be a lot, though in a different way. And we actually already have the weekend picked out that we're going to do it on. So we're gonna have details, obviously, about when the live show will be, but we want to at least give you guys an idea of like when you'll need to have the book done if you're reading with us. Let's see.
September 15th, right?
I think so. Yes, 15th, which is Sunday.
That gives you 3 full weeks.
That's right. And it's going to be on Julia's channel again.
Yes.
We're doing the same thing that we did with the Giver series, where we split them up half and half. So
we'll be back here.
So like time to be determined, but it's going to be on Sunday, September 15th, and I can't wait.
I'm excited to cry some more.
I know. So, anything to add, Julia?
No, thank you for going on this journey through the Giver Quartet with me. I'm very excited to have influenced you in this way.
Yeah, it was a wonderful experience. So, yeah, thank you guys who are, watching this later, or if you tuned in for a bit, or if you end up reading the books after. I know we sometimes get people who like sort of follow along afterwards, which is very cool. So, yeah, thank you to everybody.
You're here.
Julia, you want to sign off since it's your video?
Yeah, I have to sign us off. Yeah, same. Thank you all if you have joined in and read these books alongside us. I'm glad you had that experience. Even if it hurt you. It's for the best, I promise. And I'm excited to get into this next round and discuss some YA books with you, Cara. So until then, take care, everyone.
Bye.
We're out of here.